Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Now that Act 8.1 completion guide has been posted, we need to start working through exploration guides quest by quest as we always do. So as always, the format is going to be quite simple. I'm going to go over every single path and explain the strategies and the better counters, and then also counters to the boss fights. As I started to state that the easiest path in my opinion is this Disarm heavy attack heavy attack lane, where basically you can just spam heavy attacks, and with Domino you can finish fight in like 3-4 heavy attacks, and pretty much any champion that has any meaningful damage hidden in their heavy attacks, like Cable with Apoc synergy for instance, or whatever else you will. You're just gonna blitz through the entire lane extremely straightforward and quick, and there aren't any major obstacles on the road either. Maybe is it Sauron on that one as well? Sauron is kind of like the only one that can be somewhat annoying, but you can kill him so fast that it doesn't really matter. So if you are worried about Sauron, bring in a tech class counter. Now, moving on to the next lane is Bubble Shield, Sixth Sense, True Lies, Light 'em Up, Incinerate vulnerability, and Shock vulnerability. The entire point of this path is the idea that they're going to be auto-blocking a lot and all the time, and your true accuracy and true strike nodes will not be helping you. However, as long as you have Incinerate or Shock on the opponent, they will not be able to auto-block or evade, and you're going to be doing a ton of damage. So Black Widow Deadly Origins is great here, Sunspot is great here, Human Torch is great here, I don't know, even Night Thrasher, or basically any champions with constant and easy access to Incinerate and or Shock. You can even use Dr. Doom, for instance. Also keep in mind that because of Sixth Sense node, they are not able to auto-block heavy attacks as well, so you can perfectly straightforward just pick any parry heavy champion as well. Keep in mind Bubble Shield, when every 10th blocked hit is going to be unblockable, but that's not a major issue. This is also one of the easier lanes in my opinion. Now this lane is, however, fairly tricky and requires quite interesting counters. So first node is Caustic Temper, which basically requires you to use a poison immune champion that has access to Fury, but they are helping you out here, where every time you parry, you gain a Fury buff. That Fury buff isn't potent, but it just helps you unlock Caustic Temper node. So any poison immune champion technically can do this lane. However, because of Flare, you will be degenerating quite a bit. So what you want to look out for, champions that are poison immune and can heal up ideally. And the perfect champion, the perfect counter for this entire path is Joe Fixit, basically. In reality, you can pretty much use any poison immune champion, or champions like Kingpin and Ghost as well, and Kitty Pryde, who can absorb that damage. With Ghost, you would need to bring in the Hood synergy. For me, Black Widow Clairvoyant worked out quite well as well, but you will not be able to heal with Black Widow Clairvoyant, but because of Flare, you do quite a bit of damage. You do have quite a bit of opportunity to spam your level 2s quite quickly, and just keep her in the poison curse, and you can finish out fights relatively quickly. So here, the main thing is just bring in Joe Fixit or high damage output poison immune champions. Something like, I don't know, Hulkling, for instance, probably work extremely well. Then also we have Hyperion, definitely a very quick fight finisher. We have, you can even bring in Diablo. Diablo should be doing quite well here, just parry heavy and then heal up through those poisons. Immortal Abomination should be doing quite well, but the perfect option here is Joe Fixit. Right, let's move on to the next one, and this is quite fun, where we have the Cosmic Grit node. That is the one that we are familiar with from Cav EQ, where you gain aptitudes wherever you gain buffs, basically past 3 Fury, Armor Up, or Precision buffs, and those aptitudes make all of your other buffs significantly more potent. And this is an absolute cosmic fiesta. The rest of the nodes, there aren't anything too special to it. So for me personally, what worked out the best was Angela with Odin. So, Odin's pre-fights was absolutely melting this lane. Hyperion does great here. Venom does great here. You can bring in CGR, especially if you give him Odin's pre-fights. That also is, you know, perfectly fine. You can bring in Hercules, as you can do with much of these lanes. I will not be pointing out where you can and cannot bring in Hercules, because in reality, Hercules can pretty much go through about half, if not 75% of these lanes. But there are alternative and better options as well, and it would be kind of boring if I just said perk this lane, perk that lane. But yeah, Cersei is good option. Silver Surfer is good option for this lane. We have, I don't know, Medusa, especially if you synergize her up. Venom Pool can work quite well as well, even though it's going to be slightly slower. But yeah, definitely loads of options. I don't know, you can even bring in Phoenix and have quite a bit of fun with your Phoenix in here and get some crazy numbers going. But yeah, Angela and Odin Synergy was my go-to option. Now we have Disarm Stun, special 2-lane. And then we have to deal with Clean Slate, where the defender finishes special attack, they gain debuff immunity passive. And that debuff immunity is reduced for each debuff that they already have. And this is the base idea of just using big level 2 nuke type of champions. Not for this fight specifically, but further on, you can have quite a bit, well, I would say CGR for some of these fights, but looking at the opponents, we have Blade, we have Miles. So against Miles, you will definitely want somebody that bypasses miss. So for instance, a Professor X maybe is going to be very, very good against Miles Morales there. And then just keep an eye out on these opponents. Against Mojo, you can bring in somebody that does not gain buffs. For instance, Spidey 99, you can bring in Human Torch, Red Guardian, Titania, all of these champions can do here quite well. So ideally, if you do have a champion that does have plenty of damage on level 2. Other than that, just watch out for the individual fight counters and keep in mind that if you want to benefit from the node, you're going to have a miss counter against Miles. But that's pretty much it. Just keep in mind that they can be occasionally stun immune. Yeah, I think APOC here would work quite well as well with Cable Synergy for several of these fights because you can just stun the opponents without ever needing to parry them as well. And then moving next, final lane, here is Mystic Focus, Mystic Consumption, Scared Stiff, and Catatonic. And this one was Scarlet Witch Sigil lane through and through. You just spam special attacks and they go down. In reality, you can pretty much use anybody. You don't need to bother much about Mystic Focus. It wasn't important, especially if you have MD active. Scared Stiff is an annoying root node, but you can fairly easily just ignore it as long as you manage to be somewhat aggressive. And that Catatonic doesn't really come in play, so it's all about counters yet again. And most of these champions do have buffs that you can nullify. So yeah, Dr. Doom, Scarlet Witch Sigil, Black Widow, Clairvoyant. Rest of your Mystic champions will do well enough. I would say probably the trickiest lanes here would be that Flare with Caustic Temper, and this one with Riot Shield. Also remember, you do not necessarily have to benefit or work around these Riot Shield nodes. You can just completely ignore them and take these fights as they are normal, and then bring in counters to like Blade and Miles and Mojo specifically and go through it as is. And now we can take a look at the boss fights. Where are the boss fights? Here we go. So this first fight has Incinerate vulnerability, which is quite important, but before we get there, the defender has 50% chance to inflict attacker with Rupture debuff on contact. This effect will not trigger a defender suffering from an Incinerate debuff. The defender also takes 100% reduced damage from Bleed and Rupture effect against Regeneration block. So this is basically an energy adoption Rupture version, right? What you need to know is that these Ruptures aren't big. So long as you slow play, you don't need to have like some sort of debuff shrug immunity or Rupture immunity or something like that. If you have a reasonably ranked up champion and if you're not going like super ham aggressive, you will survive. Especially if your champion has increased amount of physical resistance, like many champions in the game do have. So after that, the only thing that you really have to worry about is this: every 10 seconds attacker is rooted for 4 seconds. Rooted champions cannot move but still attack, block, and dodge. Activating a special attack removes root. This timer is paused while the attacker is rooted and is reset if attacker lands a hit. So this root mechanic is kind of the one thing that you ought to be keeping in mind. For this fight, Kingpin will do great because he can benefit from eating up those Ruptures. Ghost can do quite well, but you can quite simply also use champion like Human Torch, for instance. Do not apply the pre-fight, because then you can benefit from the Incinerate vulnerability, or you can pretty much bring in any other Incinerate champion and just kind of slow play it, knowing that you have to play around that route. There isn't anything too hard about this fight. Same as this Red Skull. This Red Skull has poison vulnerability, and you do not want to nullify your armor break him, really. Also, debuff synthesis, stun and bleed, so whenever attacker applies a bleed on the opponent while the defender is suffering from stun debuff, both debuffs are consumed and opponents inflicted with poison. Because of the nature of this fight, what you want to focus here is basically damage over time effects. Ideally poison, so champions like Diablo, again, will work great here. Immortal Abomination is going to do fantastic, or any other champions that have access to meaningful poison damage. At the same time, you can bring in champions that apply bleeds. For instance, Mallman's going to do perfect, because you're going to be applying tons of bleeds, which is going to bypass all of that armor stuff anyways. And whenever you're going to be applying bleed whilst he's stunned, because you can parry him when he's not stun immune because of steady perseverance, and then you're going to be inflicting poison and accessing increased to 100% damage as is. So it's a fairly straightforward lane, nothing too difficult here. Additionally, you can always just Magneto the guy. Have the fun. Right, and Hood. Hood is also a quite straightforward, cheesable boss, to be honest, because of the Caltrops lane. It immediately makes Ghost very powerful. It opens up Cable, Apocalypse Cheese. It opens up OG Storm, or when you have made her Horseman of Apocalypse Cheese. It opens up insane amount of power to Omega Red. It obviously opens up power for Kingpin as well, especially if you do have the Hood synergy. That's about it. Rest of the nodes, there's not much to worry about. Foresight is there to give you extra attack if you feel comfortable intercepting. And yeah, none of these bosses are overly difficult. And again, as long as you know how to counter these lanes, none of these lanes are too bad either. Again, as I mentioned, this Caustic Temper for some people might end up costing a few items if you don't have like nuke poison immune champions or a Joe Fix-It. But again, as long as you know that you just need poison immunity and then you can just parry and go and lay in the opponent, you can be doing just fine. And on this last lane, again, don't make the mistake on overly focusing on that level 2 aspect. Make sure that you bring in counters to Blade, counter to Miles, counter to Craven, who will maybe have his traps invisible. And then Mojo and obviously Misty Knight. So looking at that Misty Knight and the rest of the setup here, I think a very solid option would be to bring in Apocalypse again with Cable and Professor X. Use Professor X for Miles, then you can use Apocalypse for Craven and Blade, and also further on Misty Knight, because Apocalypse will be able to shut down her Wade eventually and the rest of her abilities as well. So yeah, I'd probably recommend bringing in Mutant Team for this one. But that's about it. Let me know if you have any more questions, and I'll be getting off to recording 812 Exploration Guide. I'll catch you guys soon. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information